Greetings and welcome everyone to this special presentation where we welcome Dr. Robert Hesse to speak to us about his work with the research of centering prayer and mental illness. I'll be introducing Dr. Hesse in just a minute, but I wanted to give you a brief overview of how the next hour will go. Dr. Hesse will speak for about 40 minutes. He's going to try to keep it to about that length. And about 30 minutes past the hour, I will open up the chat. And you're invited at that time to start posting any questions that you might have for Dr. Hesse. And once he's done with his presentation, I'll sort through those questions and he'll begin to address those. And if we don't get to all of the questions, I'll make sure that he gets them and he can answer each one of you individually, or you can email me afterwards. So that'll be how this hour goes. And we are recording this if you'd like to listen to different sections or share this with other people. So thank you again for making the time to be here. So about Dr. Hesse and his research. Bob is a permanent Catholic deacon in the Archdiocese of Galveston, Houston, Texas. In 2011, at the encouragement of Father Thomas Keating, he co-founded Contemplative Network and became its chairman. Contemplative Network is dedicated to interfaith contemplative prayer, medical research, and the establishment of ministries based on this research. He is a practicing contemplative in the Trappist Christian tradition, and during a retreat at Gethsemane Monastery, Trappist monk Thomas Merton was an inspiration in Dr. Hesse's contemplative prayer practice. And I think he's going to share a little bit more about his history with Thomas Keating and with contemplative prayer. Dr. Hesse is a retired board vice chairman and faculty of the Interfaith Institute for Spirituality and Health, which serves the Texas Medical Center, the largest in the world. He is adjunct faculty at the University of St. Thomas, a faculty member of the Spitzer Magis Center and Spiritual Direction Institute at the Emmaus Spirituality Center, an instructor at the Pontifical University Regina Apostolorum, spell that if you can, in Rome. And finally, he is co-founder of the first regularly scheduled Faith and Science Conference in Rome, which he's going to speak more about. So Dr. Hesse, welcome and thank you for your time and sharing your wisdom with us today.
Thank you, Pamela, and welcome everyone. I would say good morning or good afternoon, but don't know where everybody's at. So I'll go ahead and begin here. Now, the meeting's being recorded, I just noticed, so that's wonderful. This is the presentation that Pamela was talking about, and my email address is down there at the bottom if you want to email me after the conference. And I guess this will be recorded, so that'll be fine. Just a second here. The presentation agenda is going to be in 4 parts: historical background, anecdotal inspirations, mystical research, and the oneness of service. And I'm going to, because a lot of people here are from Contemplative Outreach Limited, I'm going to give a little bit of historical background on my connection to that, even though some participants here may not know that background. Basically, the first thing I want to do is dispel a misconception about faith and science. And the reason is that the misconception is that they're mutually exclusive, but they're actually asymptotically converging. And what do I mean by that? Well, they're infinitely approaching without touching. And the reason they don't touch is because they're answering two different questions. Faith attempts to answer the question why, and science how. And just to be sure we dispel that misconception, I'm going to give a couple of quotes. Miracles are not contrary to nature, but only contrary to what we know about nature. Now, I have found over time that most people think that a miracle is an exception to the laws of nature, when actually it's really about the message, not the how. There are only two ways to live your life: as though nothing is a miracle or as though everything is a miracle. I personally believe in both of these, and I think I can be backed up by pretty important people, and I'd like for you to guess who said these quotes as we go through. The first is St. Augustine of Hippo, and the second is Albert Einstein. And to encourage you that science is important in our study and our love of God, because God has created the universe, the most beautiful emotion we can experience is the mystical. And I have come to the conclusion that sometimes we think these were quotes from theologians. That was Albert Einstein. I have come to discover that a lot of the paradigm shifts in science are inspired by mystical experiences by scientists, but they never will talk about them. Now, the Dalai Lama invited Keating to attend the Mind and Life Institute by the Buddhists to assess the research they were doing on the Tibetan Buddhist monks. And I was close to Father Keating because I had attended a lot of the retreats, and he became kind of a mentor to me, like he did to a lot of people. And he knew my interest in science and consciousness. And so he asked me to be his advance man to the conference to see if I thought it was legitimate science. And I was honored to do so. So when I arrived there, one of the people, I can quote, "Nature has endowed the human brain with a malleability and flexibility that lets it adapt to the demands of the world. It has it finds itself in." It's hard to turn my phone off. So anyway, tried to do it. That was actually Richie Davidson, whom I met. He's the top researcher on Buddhists. And I also met monk Mathieu Ricard, who's a convert from Christianity in France to Buddhism, and he went to Tibet. And the Tibetan Buddhists they did EEG scans of the Tibetan Buddhists. And what's interesting is the Jewish, Christian, and Muslim Abrahamic faiths all believe that God dwells within everyone. So whether the Buddhists believe in a God or not is pretty immaterial, in a sense that, as a believer myself, I believe that, like the Abrahamic faiths believe, that God dwells within everyone and God will influence good results. And so I reported to Keating that this was very solid research, and that we should help participate in it if we could. Well, that didn't happen. And I saw just a lack of research on theistic belief systems. And then I came to believe and find out that there was research on religion and health. And the seminal work of that was Handbook of Religion and Health by Harold Cohen. Now, he's an editor of this document, which is a conglomeration of all the research that's been done on the medical effects and healing effects of having a belief in a higher power, going to religious services regularly, and praying regularly, regardless of your faith. And most of the research on the praying was on discursive prayer, not contemplative. And so I was co-coordinator of the Houston chapter of Contemplative Outreach in Houston. And at the time, Contemplative Outreach, I believe is still the case, teaches centering prayer, but was at the time not interested in research or interfaith dialogue. Now, with the largest medical center in the world in Houston and the most religiously diverse city in the country being Houston, which most people don't know, I was interested in expanding on those two areas when I knew Keating was also very interested in it, even though it wasn't happening, Contemplative Outreach. So I approached Keating and I said, I'd like to get into this. What would you recommend? And he actually recommended we form our own 501c3. And that's what we did. My co-founder, co-coordinator, which is Kim Kehoe, Dr. Kim Kehoe, interesting guy. He had his doctorate from Harvard in business and was co-coordinator of Houston. And he became chairman. I was president. He has since passed away, but we formed Contemplative Network. And you can see that we have research, prayer, about us, resources, and you can subscribe to a newsletter, which will keep you posted. But we populated the board with interfaith. Basically, Reverend John Graham's an Episcopal priest with 3 doctorates. He was the former president of the Institute for Spirituality and Health that I was vice chairman of, and that's the oldest such organization in the country, first teaching chaplains. Rabbi Harvey Rosenstock is a Kabbalist in the Jewish tradition, contemplative tradition, and an expert at PTSD. Imam Jamal Rahman is a Sufi, very well known in the Muslim tradition. Scientist Jeff Renner, active in Contemplative Outreach and also on the board of Contemplative Network. Entrepreneur Lansing Jones, Professor Carol Pentney, and Reverend Jenna Davis, who is an Episcopal priest too. And then my good friend Roshi and Father Robert Kennedy, a Jesuit priest, the first priest in the country to become a Roshi in the Zen Buddhist tradition. So you can see I was interested, and we were interested in the science because that relates to all human beings. And so we started to teach it around the world. I taught it around the world in many countries. I can't tell you how many, although I've traveled over 100, and I started to see things happen. But ironically, I was encouraged that we were doing the right thing in what Keating wanted and everybody wanted in Contemplative Outreach ultimately. Through the great discoveries of science and spirituality, we find ourselves essentially in a new place, a new and different place than ever before in history. It's time of enormous expectancy and possibility. This was an encouragement that we got after we were well along in Contemplative Network, and it was said by Thomas from his deathbed. And that told me that's where he wanted to go. And so that gave us extra encouragement. So I was learning from anecdotal experiences, watching people that I was teaching, because quite often they will share their experiences with the teacher, but not necessarily just anybody, because they become very private. And I was cataloging those in my head as we went along. But to understand why they touched me in a faith science way, I need to tell you about the brain duality, how the brain is designed. It's unconscious and conscious. Now I'm going to give you a little bit of the aspects of the conscious and unconscious. Unconscious is very fast, the conscious is slow. Automatic, systematic. Reactive, proactive. Impulsive, reflective. Emotion, reason. Limbic part of the brain, neocortex part. The oldest part of the brain is the unconscious. The youngest is conscious. 95% of the brain is unconscious, 5% is conscious. Now you're going to say to me, why would I mention the universe? That'll become clear later in the talk, but only 5% of the universe is visible. That's very analogous to the brain. 5% is conscious. Now, why do I talk about this? Well, consciousness illusion is something that was commented on by experts. A human being is spatially and temporally limited in limited piece, in a temporally limited piece of the whole, what we call the universe. He experiences himself and his feelings as separate from the rest, an optical illusion for his consciousness. Now, that was Einstein. So Einstein was starting to look at not just the cosmology of his wonderful expertise, but also consciousness. The unconscious unloading. What does that mean? Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. Carl Jung, psychiatrist. Now, why am I getting into this conscious, unconscious? Well, if you think about how we pray, both meditation and contemplation, and centering prayer, as you probably all know, you're gently letting go of your thoughts and opening your conscious brain to be less ruminating. That allows the unconscious to unload. So let's talk about the prayer definitions to be sure that we also dispel one of the major misconceptions. Now, these are the etymological definitions, not necessarily used in the secular world. Meditation, which is the conscious side. Latin meditatio means to think. It focuses on thoughts, including adoration, contrition, thanksgiving, and supplication, acts, either the mind alone or also verbalized. The secular world uses that term to also include this term, which is not etymologically correct. Contemplation is the unconscious. Latin contemplatus means to gaze attentively, resting in God. It is silent without thoughts, thus opening ourselves up to the gift of union, divine union. And of course, that is facilitated by centering prayer. So having said that and got it in this concept of the unconscious conscious, now I would like to tell you about my anecdotal experiences. Now, these were unloading experiences, the unloading of the unconscious, and they were sometimes with ecstasy, observed during teaching within centering prayer, sometimes not. These were later published research results in the World Journal of Advanced Research Reviews, and I'll get into that research later. But right now, I want to tell you the stories of what inspired me. The first was near-death experiences versus spiritual contemplative experiences. Now, I coined the term SCE to make a distinction between that mystical experience and the mystical experience that happens that is connected with death. And I taught this to 10 people in Houston, centering prayer, interfaith centering prayer, which is possible because of the Abrahamic faith belief, internal dwelling of God. And 3 of the 10 people at the end of their very first 10, 20 minutes set in life started to describe that they had just relived their near-death experience that they had previously in life. I was stunned. I had never seen this happen before. And as they were describing it, I started to see analogies to the spiritual contemplative experiences people have that are separate from death that I had been learning when I teach this. And I categorized that in my head. And then I was later invited to go to Cuba to teach faith and science. I teach a graduate course on it too. So all the deacons in Cuba. And one of the long story short, basically, one of the people in the group was not a deacon. And later I had that same year, 2015, a man was there, and he was one of the world's experts in bringing people out of coma. I got to know him and I said, why don't we do research on near death versus spiritual contemplative? But I said, how do you catch them in the act? And he says, you don't have to, as long as they remember it. If you're asking them to remember it while we're doing brain scans, it's just as valid. And of course, the basis is PTSD, because that's what PTSD does. Something triggers your memory, and all of a sudden back comes the event and you relive it. So that's basically, we commissioned him to do the research, which we'll get into later. Bipolar disorder. My wife suffered by bipolar disorder for 40 years. The poor woman suffered. She suffered terribly. I couldn't stand to see her suffering. As I was journeying through my spiritual life, learned centering prayer, I taught it to her in our backyard. After 20 minutes, I didn't want to bring her out of it. After 40, and then I left quietly, let her alone. She stayed in it for 45 minutes. And when she came out, she was at total peace. Her life was changed. what was happening. Just like the NDESCE, the memory unloaded from the unconscious and came into the conscious. For her, the ruminations indicative of the manic state of bipolar disorder, those ruminations ceased and it allowed the unconscious to unload into the conscious brain, because the conscious brain was being lessened of ruminations. We commissioned research based on that. PTSD, taught 10 people. Didn't know them. 3 months later, I run into one of the people, a man. I said, how's it going? He said, well, I had something strange happen. What happened? I said. He said, suddenly I became completely aware of what happened to me in Vietnam. I said, what did you do then? He said, I ever so gently let it go and returned to God. I nearly fell over and I saw the connection. Conscious brain, the unconscious to unload, and now he was trained to let go of that unconscious unloading. The brain actually protects you from the bad things in life. It's the depository for not only bad things, but also virtues and vices. A lot of stuff is in the unconscious. I told that incident to one of the top psychiatrists in Houston, who happened to be an expert at PTSD and ministered to the VA hospital here, the second largest. And he nearly fell over. He said, we don't know how to treat PTSD. I said, well, you do now. And then I taught it to all the chaplains at the VA hospital. That led to another research project I'll get into. Parkinson's disease. When I was reporting at the 2015, we started the conference, ND research. 2017 at the conference on disorders of consciousness in Cuba, I was reporting the results, and afterwards, the daughter of the MD neuroscientist who did the research for us, who's also an MD neuroscientist, invited me to her house. And I got there, and she said, I'd like for you to teach it to my family and friends. I said, okay. I got there early, trying to get myself around Cuba. I don't speak Spanish. And I got there early, and she said, by the way, one of the people suffers from Parkinson's. And I said, well, okay. Didn't know anything about that. And so I was teaching it to everybody. And in Spanish and in English, and it was being translated by her husband, who was also an MD neuroscientist. So I'm surrounded by neuroscientists. And so I started, and all of a sudden, within seconds, he goes into a full-blown freeze. Now, a freeze in Parkinson's is the terminology for what, as a layperson, you would call a seizure. Completely contorted. And I get into an argument with God. I do this quite often. I tell people it's okay to argue with God as long as you lose the argument, okay? So I got in this argument with God. What do you expect me to do here? What in heaven do you expect me to do here? And I didn't use the word heaven, I'll be honest with you, okay? So the message was clear, move on. And I did. And the only difference in teaching it that I told them is, and by the way, his wife was sponging him down because your muscles are flexing. And it was clear he was trying to stop it. And they were too. So everybody went down with their hands on their knees except him, and he was still in it. And my different explanation was only one thing, and that was, Jose, I know if you're thinking to try to stop this, let that go, because that's a thought. And everyone else, if we're trying to help him stop this, and we're thinking about hoping he stops it, that's a thought. But then, and I don't go as deep when I get into something like this. And I kept an eye on him, and with 1 to 2 minutes, he's down. silent. I almost wept on the spot. I very gently brought them out so that he could stay in it. His wife left the room crying. She had never seen anything like it. I leaned over to the MDs. I said, "This is your next research project." After another 15 minutes, he was out into it 35 minutes. He came out himself. He comes up to me this close to my nose, and in passionate Spanish starts unloading to me. I didn't understand him. Then after that, they translated. He said to me, when Castro took over, he took all the children into the countryside to purge them of their belief in God. I have been searching for God my whole life, and I have finally found him. All we could do was weep on each other's shoulders. There were no words left. Mystical research. It's all based on the concept of neuroplasticity, that the brain is not static, it's changing all the time. Neuroscientists did not always believe that. In fact, strangely enough, cosmologists believed that the universe was unchanging. And after they decided, and by the way, Einstein thought this universe was static. And only after they changed and said, and Einstein was convinced that it was expanding, by the way, by a Jesuit priest, believe it or not, that a Jesuit priest cosmologist, that actually the next thing was a neuroscientist said, "Oh yeah, the brain's changing too. We're discovering this." The question was, what tool were we going to pick for the part of the brain scans? And I got time left. Good. What tool are we going to pick for the brain scans? Well, the question was, you got to get a tool that spatially tells you where the things are happening in the brain and at what time they're happening. Well, these tools, you've heard them before, are good for spatial but not temporal. These QEEG is good for temporal but not spatial, which is what they were using on the Tibetan Buddhists mainly. These are pretty good for both, but PET scans are very high doses of radiation. We chose quantitative EEG tomography in most of our studies, quantitative electroencephalogram tomography, and it's the best for pathophysiological brain mechanisms because it combines EEG timing with MRI spatial. You don't have to remember that. I'm just telling you what we did. Mystical experiences. Now, I want to tell you that there are two types, and you probably know this already. There are gifts of the Holy Spirit. It's been my experience in teaching it, 95+% of the people get it, but they may not be aware that they're getting it. It may be in the unconscious, and it's what God knows they need. And it isn't necessarily during the prayer. The other type is out-of-body ecstasy. In my experience in teaching it, 5 to 10% of the people get this, and sometimes during the actual prayer. I talked to Keating about this. He confirmed those percentages in his experience. I wanted to tell you those two because we did not take into account either one of those. We just looked at the brain scans. We didn't ask him about anything else, okay? Now, the first thing here is the NDE versus SCE research. This is the first one we did. We used 3 different methods: snapshot neural, which gives you a picture in time. Then we did continuous EEG to give a time frame during the 20-minute sit. And then we looked at the continuous anatomic assessments, which are really a heart rate and heart rate variability. Heart rate variability can change too based on things. We got a match in all the patients between those who, and by the way, the subjects were 5 people that I got from Calixto Machado's research in Cuba on people who were in coma and came out and told him about their near-death experiences. See, they'll tell the doctor, but not anybody else. So he who knew who these people were. I got the spiritual contemplative patients from Father Walker, who used to be the chairman of Contemplative Outreach, and he was a priest in Cuba. I called him over. And so we got the two sets, compared their brain scans of people remembering their near-death experience and people remembering their spiritual contemplative experiences separate from near-death, and the attributes matched. Now, why is this all important? Because ultimately, we're trying to set up ministries. And if we can show this to people, that it lessens the fear of death if they understand this. Now, by the way, not all people have pleasant near-death experiences. About 5% don't have pleasant, and there's a reason for that. But that's an application. Bipolar disorder, we use QEEG. Now, in QEEG, this was before centering prayer. Can you see that slide? Before centering prayer, okay. And after. Now, QEEG, a 5-subject grand average, shows abnormality consistent with depressive phase of bipolar disorder. The abnormality is removed after interfaith centering prayer. So clearly there is an effect on the brain of centering prayer here. And so now the next is PTSD. This is the most recent one we just finished. This is QEEGT. 5-patient grand average QEEGT maps in frontal, axial, and sagittal planes of the brain. Basal PTSD patients have increased theta activity in the parietal, and that's before you start prayer. In the middle of centering prayer, 10 minutes in, they're doing this while they're wired, okay? The theta activity decreases. At the end of 20 minutes, centering prayer, theta activity is almost zero. So there is an effect on patients with PTSD. Now, I don't want to go through one brain scan after another. That's going to bore you to death. So this is a video of a Parkinson's patient that they taught in Cuba. I was not there. They were not commissioned presenters of centering prayer. I was, as being a co-coordinator of Houston. But they did their best. And so you're going to see how they taught them. It's not perfectly taught. And you'll see, but watch what happens to this patient. He's one of 4 that were all videoed, and all of them had the same reaction. Sorry, it's not in English.
El paciente hace su rutina diaria en 2 ocasiones al día, a veces hasta 3, su centro de meditación acompañado por sus familiares. En este caso, no lo hicimos de la mañana para llevarlo a su máximo grado de temblor. Esto le ocasiona un estado de ansiedad generalizada, depresión, angustia, y pues vamos a comenzar en breve a realizar su centro de meditación junto a sus familiares y la doctora neuróloga que lo acompaña. Veremos el cambio de antes y después.
That's a freeze. You see, she's touching him now. We wouldn't do that, obviously. I think you get the message. Now, these patients, all 4 of them, no longer got depressed, because what happens is they get freezes in the middle of the night and they get sleep deprivation, causes depression. So they do this twice a day and they can't stop. They have to do it. Otherwise, they have these recurring things, and they are just so excited because they are no longer able to be helped with medications. So this was a powerful blessing to all four of these different families. I reported the results of this not only in technical journals, but also in my book, Faith and Science, A Journey into God's Mystical Love. And this is the teacher's guide because people are wanting to use it as a textbook. It's both a textbook and a memoir of my own personal journey into God's mystical love. And it's not written here, but the 4 technical chapters are physics to creation, chemistry to life, biology to consciousness, and psychology to mysticism. Now, oneness of service. What do I mean by that? Well, what's oneness consciousness? There is the possibility there is only one self. There is only one God. There is only one self or one consciousness. In fact, and in light of scientific discoveries, if there is one consciousness, it is the infinite, unlimited consciousness of God, which is shared with every creature according to its capacity. Who said that? And why is that relevant to the unloading of the unconscious to the conscious that we just observed in all these people? This is why we dedicated the conference that Pamela mentioned to Thomas Keating. Consciousness to matter. I regard consciousness as fundamental. I regard matter as derivative from consciousness. We cannot get behind consciousness. Everything that we talk about, everything that we regard as existing, postulates consciousness. What lunatic said that? That was my reaction. What is he? This guy crazy? It sounds maybe it's a fundamentalist, religious fundamentalist. Max Planck, physicist, Nobel Prize winner for quantum theory. The cutting edge of science is to unite the universe with consciousness and thinking in terms of a God, of our image of God. Ultimately, it's got to be imageless, but you can see where science is headed. Transcendent events. Now, having said that about the universe and consciousness, and wanting to set up ministries to all as a result of all those 4 research projects, and I've got more in my head that I experienced. Attention deficit disorder is another one. Okay, so anyway, I started to have a sense of, I wonder, aren't these all transitions between this world and the next? Aren't they? Let's look at that. NDE. Dr. Moody described NDE attributes in 75, and Bruce Grayson developed a scale for the attributes. And then SCE, Dr. James described mystical SCE attributes in the varieties of religious experience in 1902. So these have been around for a while. And Einstein theories led to singularity attributes at the beginning of the Big Bang. I wondered, these are all transitions to the next life. What's going on here? Well, let's look at them. Paranormal, out of body, spaceless ecstasy. You've heard those terms applied to both of these. Well, the singularity is dimensionless. It's non-material. That's what physicists know. Cognitive, timeless short prayer. Somebody that goes deep, you'll ask them, how long have you been praying? It's been 20 minutes, but they'll say 5. What about the singularity? Timeless, there's no light. NDE, effective peace, a wholeness, a sense of perfection. That's how you hear people describe it. Ordered, in physicist terms, zero entropy is a measure of, entropy is a measure of disorder. Zero entropy at the singularity means perfect order. Transcendent, divine, religious, oneness with the universe. By transcendent, divine, religious, I mean people will see angels or God or whatever. Oneness. But where's perfection and singularity? Einstein's unified theory of the four forces, one equation. Now, I'm not suggesting that's part of our research. This is just my musings of interest between faith and science. So the Rome Conference, I do write the book. I handed it to the Pope, believe it or not. I couldn't believe I had this opportunity. Then things started to explode. Huge interest in it. Was asked to do a faith and science conference in Rome, to organize a conference using the four chapters of my book, as the agenda for the conference, not because the people have to speak it, and then get top-notch speakers better than Bob. Conference characteristics: first regularly scheduled faith and science conference. Books, chapters are the agenda. Cardinal Turkson will introduce it with prayer. He's the Chancellor of the Pontifical Academy of Sciences, and they claim he was the runner-up at the conclave when they elected Pope Francis. So time will tell. Sistine Chapel, private sacred music, so there's going to be off-site with the music and art, but we had to reschedule because the Pope died. It got complicated, so we're rescheduling 226. Here's our plan: culminate in neuroscientific research and faith-oriented Rome, then leverage to the second conference in science-oriented Houston, most religiously diverse U.S. city and home of the world's largest medical center. If you want to track where the conference stands, here is the status and a QR code. And I think you'll get a copy of this presentation. And I think I ran over by a minute, maybe. I don't know. So there you are.
That was a lot, Bob. Can you stop sharing so that we can see
Yes.
you?
Yes, I will.
Thank you. So the first question that came through is someone wanting to know, how long had the subject of the studies you mentioned been practicing centering prayer?
That's a good question. Each one of these have been practicing a different length of time in the order of which we did the research. The most recent was PTSD. So not very long. We just taught it and did the research. I can tell you the most dramatic long-term look at it was Parkinson's. And that was, they're still doing it, still getting the effect. And it's, of course, don't misunderstand me as a scientist. I give credit to God for this. This isn't just some manufactured stuff, okay? God's designed the universe in such a way that we cannot know it completely. Scientists will agree to that. But he also gave us a sense of reason, and why shouldn't we look at the result of his creation and try to get a knowledge of who the creator was? It's like looking at an art piece of artwork by Salvador Dali and trying to decide whether he was having mental problems. Yeah.
Let me restate the questions. The subjects within the research study, how long had they had a practice of the prayer? Were they brand new to the prayer? Had they had a certain number of years?
Oh, I see. No, none of them had done the prayer before.
Okay, they were brand
Now,
new.
the only exception to that was when we picked the SCE subjects. They came from other Walker's pool of people that had been practicing it. But all the medical issues, no, they had never done it before.
Another question is wondering if you've done any research about centering prayer in dreams. Someone has had a centering prayer practice of over 30 years, and a lot of dreams are starting to happen.
Well, I have not. And the reason is I'm trying to focus on things that have diseases and illnesses connected with them. But let me address that. Scripture has a lot of early morning dreams of the prophets. Read it. So why is that? Well, if you look at the brain scans not brain scans, but if you look at the brain's electromagnetic energy pulses in the early morning, it's a different phase of sleep. It's halfway between deep sleep, which is problem-solving stuff, and completely awake. And that's where most of the contemplative experiences happen, in the early morning. And so I'm convinced that when you look at the wavelengths of the early morning sleep patterns, they're very similar to the contemplative practice. So it should not be a surprise that we're being given little tastes of God in early morning.
Thank you. Someone else says that they've had an established practice of centering prayer for 24 years, and yet they still experience PTSD from childhood experiences and haven't experienced the kind of healing that you're talking about with people that have relatively little centering prayer experience. So can you comment on that difference?
Well, one thing I'm trying to be very careful of, and that is not use the word healing. And there are several reasons, because we're not healing or curing an illness, number one. And if you use that term around the medical profession, they'll hand you your head, okay? The quality of life improvement is what we've been looking at, in improvements there. And so that means that it's not going to happen with everybody. And that's why we're doing these studies. These were pilot studies on just a few patients. We're trying to get funding for a larger, statistically significant population of 25 patients with the illness, and then another group, which would be your control group of 25. So I'm sorry that that's happening, but with the understanding of what's happening here, the brain has an amazing ability to catalog and retain in the unconscious things it learns in the conscious. So just hearing this, who knows? God's in charge ultimately. And so there's no guarantee. There's no guarantee.
Has this research been taught in clinical settings?
No. And you notice at the conference, I said, we're trying to come back to Houston to bring it to the medical community. The problem with the medical community and hospitals is they don't want to mix religion and health, religion and medicine. So the VA hospital, for example, the Buddhists can teach it there because there's no God involved. When we wanted to do it, take advantage of Harold Koning's research, we could only do it by off-site. We couldn't do it in the hospital. So there's a tremendous prejudice against theism in treatment. And that's why I have used neuroscience to try to pry into as a hard science, to get into the heads of these medical professionals. They've tried psychology for years, but that's still considered a soft science. So that's why I'm looking at all this research in neuroscience, not to make us feel good, but to try to convince the medical community to be open to centering prayer. Because even without the research, I know it would help people. I've seen it. Did I answer your question?
Someone else says more of a comment in support of what you're sharing. She says, I've been practicing centering prayer for 30 plus years, and it has helped me manage the debilitating illness of paranoid schizophrenia. And she said, by the way, I'm reading your wonderful book, and thank you for all you do.
Thank you. It's not me. This is not about me. This is, my whole life has been fine-tuned by the Holy Spirit to come to this point. And I never dreamed all of the different disparate experiences and background and training I've had in negotiating international contracts for major capital projects all around the world. Now I'm using that to negotiate research projects, contracts.
It's beautiful.
I mean, it's nuts. Who would have thought,
Another person adds that as a nurse of more than 60 years, a Reiki master teacher, and a centering prayer facilitator and participant with alternative medicine, I find the oneness of spirituality in all creatures. And she asked, do you experience resistance from the churches? I also do not use the term healing. So what's your experience with church communities? Do you have?
Interesting. I've taught it to, if you go to the website, we have contemplative.net. Under resources, I've given presentations at many different churches. Most of them are open to it. Not all of them believe in the indwelling Holy Spirit, which is the basic concept of the term centering prayer, which came from Thomas Merton. And so a fundamentalist church is less likely to be open to it. However, in other words, I won't mention which ones, but I've taught it in fundamentalist churches. They eat it up, and not necessarily with the knowledge of their pastor. So whatever, but it's a matter of, does God come because you invite him, or is he already there? And does she help you when she gets there? That's the issue. So no, I'm Protestant, Lutheran, Methodist, Orthodox, whole bunch, not a problem usually. In fact, once it's taught, then one of our people on our board goes in and sets up an ongoing centering prayer group. And they're all over Houston.
Here's a dosing question. The questioner says, it looks like one study you reference addressed various time intervals and impact on PTSD, etc. Related to the effects on PTSD, Parkinson tremors, etc. What does the research say about the length of time of the centering prayer session needed to see these effects? Is there a minimum amount of centering prayer?
We've never done a research on that time frame. We've always used the standard 20 minutes. I can only give you my own personal experience. When I first learned it, 20 seemed very natural. There's some reason that happens. If I'm especially stressed, I don't set a timer. I might go 40 or even 45, 50 without a timer. But no, we've never done research on trying to determine what's the optimum. And I honestly think 20 is close enough that we don't have to worry about it.
Another person is wondering about your slide categorizing the experience of centering prayer as connected with the unconscious. They said, I think of centering prayer as awareness of the presence of God, and I think of awareness as being conscious.
Say that again. Repeat it one more time.
I think of centering prayer as awareness of the presence of God, and I think of awareness as being conscious. And they're wondering about you linking centering prayer and the unconscious.
Well, in a sense, centering prayer is the unawareness, the awareness. In other words, when you become aware of something, then we have a thought, and that too has to be let go. So I would nuance the words a little bit more and say that, in a sense, centering is the unawareness of anything. However, it's also aware of music, of things that are like elevator music while we're not engaged in it. So you can have an awareness of something, but you're not engaged. That's possible during centering prayer. But if you're engaged with that awareness, which I like to think of as one unawareness, if you're engaged with it, then you're in meditation, not contemplation.
I would also add that Father Thomas often used a chart called the levels of awareness chart, which had many different levels that are engaged at any different point in the practice, which is essentially what you're saying.
Well, yes, that's true. And I was very much of a student of his in the beginning of that. That was the earlier part of his life. I didn't see him go back to that too much. And I think it had value, definitely. But he was on his own searching. And I saw him change and grow through the whole thing. It was magnificent, ending in his final oracle. So I think that's wonderful, but we didn't do research on those different phases.
Right. So that's the end of the questions in the chat, but I'm wondering, you started this conversation by saying that a lot of your research was to assist in outreach efforts. Can you talk a little bit about what that means to you, or what your vision is?
Well, I'm inspired by Mother Teresa. She was a contemplative. Every morning she was a contemplative in deep contemplative prayer. Maybe not centering prayer as a gateway, but she experienced the divine union, no question about it. Then what did she do? She went out on the streets of Calcutta to the people. Here's what I have found in a lot of wonderful organizations that are describing in words with wonderful practitioners the mystical experience, mystical union, the closeness to God, always in words. And we know that the experience is the ineffable. Richard Rohr only lately has been talking about it in the universal consciousness of the universe, in a sense. And the concept that this universal oneness is experiential. It's not verbal. And I don't want to disparage a lot of the people who have done this, because the internet's full of them. But the word outreach, in a contemplative outreach, in my view, is what is underplayed. The word action in Center for Action and Contemplation is underplayed. The word that Mother Teresa left us with is get out there. And that's what I'm trying to do with our organization, and our team is trying to do, because there are people suffering out there, and it's not just about us and our own personal experience. Does that make sense? And right now, with the conference that we're doing, is in a financial bind, because my partner in Rome wanted to go forward with the postponement, rescheduling, but now he's burned out of the money he's spent so far. So I need extra money to continue to the next level. And you can see the psychology of having it in Rome with the face side, then going to Houston with the medical center, and leveraging so we can crack open the door. So the resistance is not just in the medical community and the science. The resistance is in the contemplative community and the religious community. Very few seminaries teach science. Very few. It's crazy.
Bob, we are at the top of the hour. Thank you so much for your passion, for your love of God, and the outpouring of your own gifts and talents. I'm wondering if you could share one more time your email address in case anyone would like to follow up with you.
Yes. It's, bear with me here. rjh@contemplative.net.
rjh@contemplative.net.
Right.
Okay. Thank you so much, and bless you.
God bless everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.